don't believe in the devil.
You should. He believes in you.
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, does it?
Gabriel, I am your demise.
We're born capable of terrible things.
My name is blasphemy.
But then sometimes something else comes along and gives us just the right nudge.
People are evil.
Who are you? Your worst fear. I am Pazuzu, demon of the southwest wind.
Wait, so you're not even as powerful as the south wind or the west wind? How is that?
I used to be very important. Google it. Deus noestic. Deus ubique est.
Do I have your attention now?
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. For most of human history, the question was never whether an unseen world existed. The question was, what exactly inhabited it? Our ancestors rarely spoke of the supernatural as though it were a single place populated by a single class of beings. Instead, they described an invisible ecosystem as varied and complicated as a natural one. Forests obviously contain more than one kind of tree, oceans more than one kind of fish. Why should the unseen be any different? And the further back you go, the stranger humanity becomes. Not because those ancient people believed in impossible things, but because they believed them with remarkable precision. They didn't simply divide reality into natural and supernatural. They categorized the unseen with the same obsessive detail we reserve for biology or astronomy today. It was as though the invisible world possessed its own ecology, its own species, behaviors, territories, rules. And today, we've inherited those stories. I'm not convinced that we've inherited their questions, though. Today, the word demon functions almost like a universal solvent. It dissolves distinctions. Ancient texts describe an unfamiliar entity, well, that's a demon. A disembodied intelligence, demon. A restless dead, demon. Territorial spirit, demon. It's tidy. It's efficient. But reality, in my experience, has never shown much interest and being efficient. Imagine if someone 10,000 years from now unearthed a biology textbook and decided every living thing on Earth, from whales to mosquitoes, was simply an animal. And just leave it at that. Technically, they are correct. But practically, it's useless. The categories we ignore often tell us more than the labels we preserve. The civilizations that first asked questions about the unseen rarely appeared satisfied with broad categories. They distinguished between the dead and whatever was not dead, between divine beings, lesser spirits, between entities that wandered, entities that attached themselves to places, entities that demanded offerings, entities that associated with sickness or dreams, violence, fertility. There were entities that seemed to be bound to geography, bloodlines, some to other human consciousness as well. What fascinates me isn't whether they were right. It's that they kept drawing distinctions. Independent cultures separated by deserts, mountains, languages, centuries repeatedly behaved as though the unseen contained different forms of intelligence rather than one undifferentiated mass. Sumerians, Akkadians, Canaanites, Hebrews, Egyptians, Greeks, they disagreed about many things, yet they often shared an underlying assumption. Whatever existed beyond ordinary perception was crowded. Well, that's an odd coincidence. Perhaps coincidence is simply what we call patterns we haven't explained yet. Then there's death. Modern society treats death as a biological event. Ancient societies often treated it as the beginning of some kind of negotiation. Bodies required rituals. Graves required constant attention. Certain places became unclean. Contact with the dead carried consequences that extended beyond hygiene. We're talking about entire systems of purification that developed around the possibility that death left something behind besides the memory of those who once lived in the body. And this isn't metaphor, it's literal. Were they responding to religious symbolism? Was it psychological trauma? Could it have been cultural conditioning? Or were they describing experiences they believed repeated often enough to become tradition? It's easy to dismiss practices we no longer understand, but it's harder to explain why civilizations with no contact between them independently invented elaborate methods for preventing the dead from lingering among the living. Even stranger is humanity's persistent belief that consciousness doesn't merely survive after death, but it has behaviors of its own. Some accounts describe intelligences that deceive, teach, tempt. There are those that cling to places, objects, people. There are some that appear almost parasitic, feeding on attention or fear, grief, sacrifice. Other entities seem to be driven by motives so alien and foreign that our closest approximation is simply to call them spirits. And maybe language has become our greatest shortcut. Perhaps every time we encounter something that refuses to fit our categories, we invent a larger category instead of a better question. Demon, ghost, angel. That's 3 words. Thousands of years of observation compressed into labels so broad that they've become practically meaningless. I sometimes wonder whether ancient people would recognize our understanding of their beliefs at all. We read their texts assuming they were backwards, trying to answer the same questions we would even bother asking. But what if they weren't? What if they had already accepted that the unseen world was populated by so many different kinds of consciousnesses that the real question wasn't whether they existed, but how do they tell them apart? Because, as far as I can tell, misunderstanding the difference between 2 predators can be fatal. The natural world teaches that lesson every day. Perhaps the invisible one does too. None of this proves the ancient civilizations accurately mapped realities beyond our perception. Human beings have always been capable of misunderstanding what they experience. Fear has been the greatest tool to create stories. We've seen grief create visions. Being alone, isolated, can reshape our memory. We should be cautious before accepting extraordinary claims. But skepticism has always been a double-edged sword. It demands that we question assumptions. Not only their assumptions, but ours. And one assumption we've inherited almost without noticing is that our ancestors were less sophisticated than we are, less discerning, less capable of distinguishing one phenomena from another. Yet the evidence they left behind suggests something different. And it was a refusal to flatten mystery into pigeonholed levels of convenience. Maybe that's why these ancient voices continue to survive. Because they refuse to pretend it was so simple. From the earliest echoes of Sumerian civilization to the shadowed temples of ancient Egypt, through a contested spiritual landscape, Canaan, and into the sacred texts of the Hebrews, humanity has carried a persistent conviction that unseen forces move just beyond the veil. Entities not merely imagined, but encountered, named, feared. Across time, we have tried to understand them, to categorize them, to fight them, and this episode's no different. Joining us is one who has devoted his life to examining the evidence. He is the relentless researcher, the careful chronicler of the unseen, and patient investigator of the preternatural. Nathaniel, welcome back to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. As always, it's been a minute since I've been on, and it's always good to be on because we cover subjects that rarely get touched on the other podcasts.
That's right. Just a chance to dive into it.
Something, yeah. We'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna dive into some Sumerian stuff, some Akkadian stuff, some Bible things. We're gonna talk about some demons and things like that. But before we get too much further, let's go ahead and tell the audience where they can find you or listen to more about you if you have a website or anything else you want to drop.
So I am Nathaniel Gillis. I'm a researcher of the anomalous. And you guys can find me at parasymposia.com, or if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on my Instagram as well underneath Nathaniel Gillis. So that's me, and that's where you can find me.
Always those details will be in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, man. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, when we go back to the Sumerian material, I mean, we're going real far back. And so we're talking about like incantation texts of like the Atuku. And I mean, there's earlier Sumerian stuff, of course, but we see categories of hostile entities. I'm thinking of like the Gala demons and how they're described as beings that basically, this is one of the ones it's described as they drag their victims into the underworld. And so there's a lot of nuance in these stories. They don't really pay attention to the moral, good, bad. It's like they just pull people into the underworld. And looking at this stuff, I mean, we're not talking about, they're not like fallen angels. I mean, reading this stuff, they just don't sound like fallen angels, but they're almost like chthonic enforcers of death, if you will. And so when you look at that earlier data, I mean, do you see this continuity that connects basically, I would say, modern demonology with our earliest ancestors?
Well, here's where I'm at, and it deconstructed me from a lot of models. We, as a species, have focused on form and not on function. So the best we can do, even in antiquity, is look at what they've done and not what they've looked like. For instance, if you and I were to say, okay, what does a demon look like? Most of the time we're going to hear the description of Pan, and that's it. Nothing else but Pan. Oh, it's horns, it's hooves. And, but unfortunately, it's not that simple. And what you're hinting at is a yet classified species of it. Think about that. Where it had these entities specifically have yet to be quantified by modern demonology. What are they? They seem to be liminal. They seem to materialize at will and then dematerialize at will. And what do they represent? What we do know is that what we're looking at again is this ability to take us to areas that do not represent reality. Where is the underworld? Is it underneath the ocean? Is it not? Is it not even a category? Is it an ontological question? Is it about origin? And take us from another origin. But with respect to even demonology, we can get to that too. But the point I'm making here is that what we've done is we've looked at form and despised function. Now, what I can say about this is that what this phenomenon does is weaponize form. And so what I've done specifically within my research is I've sat down with a lot of these demonological questions and said, okay, but what do we really know about them? Because if we're looking at strictly an incorporeal entity, is this okay? I know I'm just already just shooting from the hip here. If all we're doing is looking at incorporeal entities, then how can they pull us out of that? Where are they taking us to as another dimension, as another planet? So with dealing with these demonological questions, it's the same inquiry every single time. It hasn't changed. We can go through, the Apkalo, we can go through the jinn demonology of Islamia. It doesn't matter. The problem is our model of demonology is flawed in the sense that we've created a taxonomy of entities that may not be true. Number one. Number two, again, we're dealing with alleged or incorporeal entities that can somehow self-replicate. And none of that makes sense in the current model. And so we have researchers right now in the field who are trying to meet those ends, right? Say, okay, well, they do have bodies, but they're angelic bodies, or they're what Paul would call a summa pneumaticon, or it's a resurrected body. And so what we're realizing right now is, despite these traditions, we're literally in the same boat we've always been in since the dawn of antiquity. We don't know what they are. Let's just put it out there. We don't know what they are. We have traditions, again, that were taken, and even the entities themselves are draped in cultural costumes. So what do we know about them? What we know is that somehow they are made of a different kind of matter. And then even in the Nephilim lore, somehow it's compatible with human reproduction. So my point, though, is within my model of phenomenon, I'm I hate to frame it like this, I'm over the titles, because it's done nothing for us for the last 2,000 years. What are they doing? And that's where I'm at. And I'm not skirting the question. What I'm saying is, again, that these are entities recorded by our ancestors, but even then they were grappling with the same inquiry. What are we dealing with here? Because they don't fit in any box, really. It's not extraterrestrial. It's not horns and hooves. And we're dealing with something, again, that can materialize, dematerialize at will. It seems to be outside of known physics. So, and I know I'm just shooting from the hip, but that's really where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about is specifically something that I had picked up when I was reading a little bit of a resource, an Akkadian source. Mm-hmm. And they make this reference of what they called the Edimu. And we're talking about restless dead, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
Right. And so we basically what Paul's talking about with that. And so they're not this category, and the way that the Akkadians are talking about them, they don't describe them the same way as like some kind of divine rebellion entity. But all we can do is we can see by what they do. The Edimu, what they do is they seem to hunger for living life. Mm-hmm. They seem to attach themselves to living life, and they oppress the living. And that's a very different category than, say, some kind of rebellious divine being.
Exactly. It seems that the latter model is a rather simplistic explanation for a complicated phenomenon. This gets back into Lil entities in Akkadian and other traditions where, what were they? I have a paper called His Wind is Released. And what this gets back to is that consciousness had this wind-like constitution to it. And that when you get into Lil and then Lilu and Lilit in demonology, that people ask, okay, well, she was the mother of demons. Okay, but what was she before that tradition began in demonology? She was a Lil spirit. But how can a little spirit, again, discarnate consciousness, procreate? It can't. And so what I've kind of boiled all this down to is there is this conversation going on in the field, and it has been since even Thomas Aquinas, where how can these beings that seem to be pure consciousness replicate? Because beyond all of the archetypes, beyond all of the traditions and literature, something's wrong with that entire model. And so we're getting into the territory of hungry ghosts. But even then, how can a hungry ghost inseminate a woman with the fetus? And this is what's crazy. So we do have cases like that. But in terms of academia, in terms of people right now in the field, we're still stuck. We really are. Because, some people say, okay, they're fallen angels. And then you go into the Catholic demonology and they just want to eat, kill, steal and destroy. And it's like, that's not really what's going on, guys. These are highly intelligent beings. They operate on almost like a super spectrum, like John Keel postulated, and they seem to have their agenda. And it's not just to steal, kill, and destroy. It's not just to deceive. Now, those are mechanisms built within the framework, absolutely. But I'm to the point now, my friend, where I'm sitting down with these titles and I'm going back through history and just say, okay, like, what do we really know? It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of information going on, and I almost subscribe to kind of a speciation, if you will.
Yeah.
There seems to be more than one kind of species of whatever these are, and so they all obviously have their own ontology. And if I were to, I mean, specifically, like you look into the Ugaritic, they have some really good stuff about, or excuse me, they have one of the things in the Ugaritic text called the rephaim inscriptions.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a cult of the dead, right? This is a completely,
absolutely.
That's right. And so these guys, they believe that the dead retain some kind of free will agency, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that they can move around and do whatever they want to do. And this is completely different than what we would find in later Hebrew texts.
Yeah, so there's a book that I have. It's called Disembodied Souls. And it really restructured my understanding of what they believed in Old Testament literature. Because I grew up in one of Pentecostalism. So at the very least, it was like, if you touch that subject, you're a pagan, you're excommunicated. And I was always fascinated by it. But first thing, I mean, okay, now we're dealing with what are called dialectical allomorphs, which are two words that mean the same thing but have different spellings. And so long before we had the demon or daemon in Greek mythology, we had the unclean spirit in biblical antiquity. And that unclean spirit was a part of what's called the open vessel law. And that open vessel law was designed for the priesthood, to where if you go into a house that has a corpse in it, you could be defiled by corpse pollution. And so what they would essentially do is kind of an allegory or a metaphor, really, where they would have a family. If they had somebody just die in the house, that little spirit, that consciousness was there. And they believed that the body, the soul, had the same smell as the body it came from. That's freaky, by the way. And so what happened is they have this, think of it like this, they have these jars of food, or the vessels, they preserve their food inside of them. And so they had this belief that they would have to preserve the food. It's what they do is they take the lid, place it. Why? Because they didn't want that vessel to be defiled by corpse pollution. Now you move on into that concept they had. Yeah, now it's us who are the vessels that could be polluted by the consciousness of the deceased. And now what's so crazy about this is why people need to study demonology in a deeper way, is because that was the origin of the exorcistic rite before it was commandeered by the Vatican. What is it? We've got to exorcise you, not from horns and hoods, but from what? Corpse pollution. It's weird. It's weird. I don't get it either. But my point is that there were ideas and beliefs within the Old Testament that I never got my hands on. I mean, my dad's he would fly like scholars in from Israel, and I'd sit down and eat Chipotle with them. And sometimes, I'd pick their brain about these subjects, and they were still stuck on rephaim. But my point, though, is the connection you're making here, the rephaim, the cult of the dead, is connected, again, to antiquity in the rephaim. The problem is that idea was kind of reconstituted into Hebrew theology without giving us the full linguistic background. And so behind me, I have a book with a ritual bowl inside of it. It's fascinating, a picture of it. And inside, it's an incantation to the rephaim. Because these were, again, you hit the nail on the head when you say, okay, they were a cult of the dead, but these were entities that were they were in a liminal state that had the ability to bless or to condemn. And so really a lot of these rituals that we see throughout history originally began from our ancestors, depending on where you're from, believing that there was an intermediary species. Now, I have a ritual bowl. It's fascinating. It's a picture of it. But within that cult of the dead, there were those that believed that if they did not provide an offering, or if they did not provide an incantation or ritual, that the same entities would come into their house as shadow people. And that is the beginning of phenomenology, right? Okay, well, I thought it began in Paris. No. Now we're back into antiquity, realizing, oh, what is that? And so if you take that and extrapolate that into modernity, now we have the Deborah Moffat case, where an entity is requiring a blood sacrifice, and it will not go away. It will not go away. So she goes and hires Dr. Evelyn Puglini, a witch, who shows up. Same mechanism here, guys, same pathology, where she's like, well, we brought a priest in here. We can't get rid of this. Ed Lorraine Warren came. Lloyd Auerbach's assistant researched this for them. We don't know what to do. Evan Puglini said, give it a sacred space. Same pathology. And that should not be the case, but it is. And it boggles the mind.
Yeah, that all falls back to that species idea that we're, dealing
completely
with
different
things. I mean,
Absolutely.
Talking about the incantation, the Mesopotamian incantation bowls, usually anybody who goes to a museum, typically museums all seem to have, they're a dime a dozen. These bowls are everywhere. They've survived for, all these thousands of years. And in them, what we're seeing is this practical engagement with a specific kind of an entity. It's always a specific kind of entity where they name them, they bind them, or ward them off, but they're after a specific kind of entity. And these are really interesting because, like you were saying, when we're dealing with an entity that doesn't fit this category, that category, that category, its ontology is clearly different. We have to go at it a different way. And so how do you interpret this kind of continuity that goes from Mesopotamian bowls all the way through to, like you said, modernity?
Okay, so I am creating a theoretical framework called preternatural epiphenomenal philosophy. But really what I'm trying to do is create a way to interpret these interface events. We have cases in antiquity where entities would appear. And this idea that they were wind-like spirits, it's not just the fact that people would feel wind, right? But it was almost like this translucent structure, or this being would manifest and would interface with it. The problem is, though, when you get into some of that scholarship, can we really trust what we see? More than that, can we trust what we're being told by them? That's the issue. We can't trust anything anymore. And yeah, so my thing is this, and I'm going to get back to your question. Whatever they are, they've been requiring altars. That specific species has been requiring altars since antiquity. And they share characteristics with each other that has spawned all throughout history, okay? It's everywhere in the literature, where you're talking about something, again, that can materialize to the touch, just walk through a wall. What is that? What kind of body is that? And so I'm to the point now where I'm taking their testimony to heart, but at the same time realizing that we are blinded by our own vision with these entities, and we're most often lied to by them as well. The only thing I can say with surety is that there is some kind, and I don't want to say parasitic relationship, but a symbiotic relationship to where they get something from worship, they get something from blood ritual, and we don't know what that is. Even with the rephaim concept and the malakuma, the angel, or the consciousness that exceeds death and exists after death. This idea of sacrifice, the whole relationship was centered around, if I do this, I give you more of an existence in your dimension, right? I give you more of an afterlife. And so there was this exchanging of time, where if I give you more of my time here, you get more time there. And that was the limit of their imagination. And then outside of that, if they did not perform A, B, and C rituals, or if they did not incantate, if they did not have some kind of human initiation, something else would show up, right? And they know like a snake eating its own tongue, or swallowing a snake swallowing its own tail. They would have to circumvent and go back and say, okay, but why would you send shadow people after me if I didn't do A, B, and C? And so this creates, at least in my mind, one of the very first times in history where you see the compartmentalization of the phenomenon in real time. Are we dealing with separate phenomena, separate entities, or are we dealing with the same entities that are coming back around and bringing you back into the incantation? Right? Does it make sense?
Right. Well, exactly, because as humans, we all have our own individual created spirit. And so the thing is wherever that goes, heaven, whatever. Right. And, the ancients obviously had some kind, it's found throughout indigenous cultures around the world, even today, that you pour some wine, some milk, whatever is kind of the more rarer material to appease the ancestor dead.
Yes.
But we start to see the inclusion of what are known as shadim, and we find that in the Hebrew texts, but we find it even more interesting in the Akkadian as the shadu, right? Yeah. And so the shadim are demons associated with idolatry. You have to have your household idol, and then the shadu are the same thing, where you have your household idol, but they're protecting your home.
Protecting your home, right. And this is going to fascinate a lot of people, is that even within the shadim and shadu or seidu lore, you have human consciousness existing out of body after post-biological existence. And then on the other side, you have horns and hooves. And both of these legends and traditions are growing side by side. Same thing with rephaim and rephaim. What were the rephaim before? We were told what they were in Hebrew theology. They were the deceased. What they were trying to encapsulate, though, even with disembodied souls, is that there exists consciousness out of the body. Is it dead? Not really. Is it alive? Not really. So it's within that liminal existence that we find ourselves speechless. It's ineffable. What is that? So then you have the emergence again of these entities, Genesis 6, the Nephilim, rephaim. But again, people usually tend to theorize that these are beings that are deceased Nephilim, or the offspring deceased Nephilim, but that's not really only the case. There are cases even within the literature where even just the dead,
right?
Not
just a dead human, just a regular dead human.
Humans, are also discovered and referred to as rephaim. And so again, what we're looking at here, even with Malakuma, let's get into that legend. Why is it that in the New Testament, right, Peter's family, I believe it was Peter's family, believed he was dead, and they see him coming up to the door, knocking on the door, right? And they said it must be his angel, Malakuma. Why? Because they had this concept that they were doing their best to articulate, and that was this idea that, it seems to me that there is post-human consciousness that still has constitution, still has form, still has memory. But what is that? And how is it interacting with our world? But let's get back to this again, corpse pollution. So when you have this concept of post-biological consciousness existing out of body, it's not alien to it, especially not alien to Hebrew scriptures. Matter of fact, forget about case studies of possession. Matter of fact, even within Psalms 109 and 6, it's called one of the curse texts, where David is referring to a person that's falsely accusing him, and he's talking to Yahweh and says, place over him a wicked man. And that root word for wicked is rasha. It's where we get ruah, evil spirit. And the whole concept here is that person, is being like a throne to the entity. It's sitting on top of him. Not only that, this is crazy too. This is from Jewish views of the afterlife, and in fact, disembodied souls. where that word Rasha has a dual meaning. It doesn't just mean possessing entity, by the way. It means evil entity. So those dual nature of that entity has the ability to be evil and to possess that man. And so what Hebrew scholars pull that out, and they look at that and say, okay, there's an issue here, because where did possession begin? Why is that this case? What's actually going on? But my point here is that they did have a working system to explain disembodiment. I mean, even Job said a man grieves over himself. How can you grieve over your grave if you don't have post-human consciousness? So that's where I'm at with it. But that reframes the whole narrative of possession. And it actually leads us into, again, two dueling thoughts within possession in the 17th century, the 16th century, where while we had cases in the Vatican of horns and hooves, we had cases in Softy, which now is Softy Israel, of entities that were solving their own murders, that were actually demonstrating what was being described, rather, in the Old Testament. Does it make sense?
Yeah. No, it's...
So, like, what's going on here?
Exactly. I mean, right. So with the shadim, I mean, I'm trying to refocus my brain. The sacrificing. Okay.
Yeah.
So we were talking about offerings to the shadim. Okay. This is what's really interesting, because, like I said, it has a connection with idolatry. And so not only is the shadim spirit capable of, in a way, oppressing, possessing a human being, they can take possession of physical objects and live within a thing.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that's really interesting, because we're not talking about a culture that's like, oh, this is a stand-in for the God I believe in. No,
right.
This God lives in this thing. My shadim lives here.
Yep. That's, buddy, you're getting me triggered now.
Yeah. The thing is,
nobody else
like,
talks about this,
right? And it's basically we're seeing demons actively positioning themselves behind, and I use the word demons. You understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Behind that false worship system.
Yes, and now we're getting into T. Whitten Davies' work and Professor Esther Morby's research, or the OB. Yes, and the Egyptian Uva, Abba. That's wild. But dealing with this idea that long before they possessed people, they possessed objects, and they transferred again. Now, what's so wild about that particular concept here is that when you get into Professor Esther Omori's work, specifically, not just within the Katamu inscription, but with respect to the Witch of Endor, once again, the Bible, well, people, first of all, come out of nowhere and say, well, we know she was a witch. It's like, well, yeah, forgive me, guys. That's the family Christian bookstore concept.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Get down to the linguistics of it. Number one, the text explicitly says Saul killed all the witches. Why is she there? Right? And so when you get into the linguistics, there's what's called a hapax legomenon. In other words, whoever, whatever she is never mentioned before her or after her. And she takes the place of somebody that they do not know how to quantify. What is that? Who is she? Forgive me, my dogs are going ballistic out there. I apologize, man. Yeah, it's my brother's dog, by the way. My point, though, here is that when the text is trying to articulate who she is, it goes nowhere quick, because that particular phrase in Hebrew was never mentioned in the Tanakh. It's not even mentioned in Exodus or Leviticus. And because it wasn't mentioned, what she was doing was not thereby outlawed. There was no concept, is what I'm trying to say. There was no concept of her in the literature. And so what Professor Esther Omori does is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's profound, really. Is she goes into this idea. She's like, okay, then, like, what is she? And she starts to break down the fact that if disembodied consciousness does not and cannot exist, then we have a problem in the text, because she says that Samuel comes out of the earth as a god,
right?
As an Elohim. What's that? Where's that in our angelology or our demonology?
Yeah,
makes no sense.
Yeah, there's the the concept of the Ohm, a location where the dead are, quite honestly, could be, well, they used to bury people in mass graves. Remember how we were talking about at the beginning what would happen with a human spirit when they're separated? They can get up to evil actions, of course. Of course, if we're capable of doing it in the living, why are we incapable of doing it while we're dead? Doesn't make sense. So we do see something very similar to the Witch of Endor, but we have to go all the way to the New Testament. We have to go all the way to the time when Jesus is getting off the boat at the tombs of the Gerasene demoniac. That is a Witch of Endor in the flesh.
Oh, in the flesh. And if we go back to the Old Testament, okay, first of all, that was a necromancer, right? Okay. Same, yeah. Outlawed by the Sanhedrin Council in the 1st century. But that particular species of necromancer was referred to and quantified in the Old Testament. Yahweh, and this is something that's fascinating, Yahweh, I think it was in the book of 2 Chronicles, starts prophesying and says, there will be a day when I will come to you. You will bow down to me, and I will number you for the sword. And then the heavy footfall of Yeshua HaMashiach, right? Landing on the beach, and here comes the person. What's he full of? Unclean spirits, right? What makes them unclean? And then that's a whole other conversation. My point, though, is he is possessed, and unclean spirits go into unclean things and to unclean people, at least within that framework. And that's why when he was exorcised, they went right into the pigs. It's crazy stuff. But what it shows you, even beyond the traditions, beyond the folklore, is that there's a belief system built into some of these that should not be there. And it really boggles my mind.
Yeah, when we have the interaction of the Son of God literally interacting with these things, we have to take a pause and look at all the data that is available ontologically speaking, because once you said, there's that this is all we can do is describe things by what they're not, right?
Oh yeah. Well, we know they're not that, and because they're not that, they have to be this. Right? And that's not good logic.
It isn't. And so the other issue, when we start going back and we start looking at all these things, is the potentiality. Thomas Aquinas does theorize that a watcher could very well have done something to human seed in a woman and basically create these bastard spirits, right? A bastard spirit being that which is not permissible to exist by God. And so it's made up of a human spirit because that's created by God. And then it's also this spirit that is not given permission to exist. So it doesn't have anywhere to go, right? These are those wandering spirits we have. And so when we look at somebody like Dr. Michael Heiser, who goes on and says, look, there was clearly a divine council, and there was clearly something happened. Otherwise, Enoch would never have existed. There would be no reason to write this down, because it's not a polemic against Babylon. It's not a polemic against Rome or Greece. It has nothing to do with politics. It's everything to do with the supernatural. And if that's true, what are we looking at with that entity as opposed to the human dead?
Again, this is, I'm going to throw this out there and people are going to burn me at the stake for it. But
it's only history. That's history.
I know it's just history. Yeah. Well, trust me, man, I get castigated because I had a book behind me called God, Magic, and Man. And somebody's like, you're going to recommend that to people. And it's like, well, it's a book about monotheism. But so first I'd have to explain to them what monotheism is before I have to dig myself out of that hole. So yes, getting back to even again, the whole angel concept. Now we're dealing with Malakuma. But what is that? What is that before it was again reconstituted in Hebrew thought? What was rephaim before it was right? So what we're looking at again is some kind of cultural overlap and borrowed loan words, it's my perspective, to describe something. And if we're looking at what that entity is, even Thomas Aquinas fails. And I'm a Thomas fan, guys, so don't, hate on me for that.
Yeah, right, both of us.
But I mean, he could not explain succubi and incubi. And I'm not talking about he couldn't explain it. The gap was like Oh, no. Because again, you're looking at a spirit or some kind of reorganized matter that have the ability to replicate with a woman. Now, even if, okay, as an incubus, the problem is that even when we get into those case studies in that literature, if we fail to address Father Sinister of Amino's work, we've broken the entire model before we've even had a chance to answer the question.
Right.
Because Aquinas says, well, okay, he's like, all right, so essentially what happens is, yes, these are some kind of incorporeal entity, but what they do is they go to a man in the image of a woman as a succubus. They harvest secretions from the man. Then they go as a woman to they harvest the secretions from a man. Then they go to a woman as the man and they inseminate her, right? Well, the problem is, if in order to answer that question, you have to preserve that secretion. And we fall right back into the idea of, okay, do they have a body or not? Because how can they preserve it? Where? How? What's going on? So we fall into two camps. Is it technology or is it an embodied entity? Now, here's a problem that is raised with respect to incubi entities, is that Sinister of Amino was finding secretions on victims that were accompanied by sigils. So now we're another species. What is that? Because that's more like a practitioner that's performing, I don't know if I could say that, magic, that kind of magic, to self-replicate.
Right, a dark shadim, basically, yeah. Right.
Either an entity within him,
right,
where now we're getting into my field necrometics that I've created, where you don't have to have an incorporeal entity there to replicate the incorporeal, right? No, you can have somebody that's human but possessed that can create a social skin for that entity within them to possess. Now, again, it's self-replication of a species, but this gets back to things and people. So within T. Whitten Davies' work, which I highly recommend, he starts to break down the nature of the Ov, or Uv. And there are three definitions, according to the Bible, of Uv. Number one, it is the possessing entity, which we've already touched on. The second definition is that it was a device the necromancer placed in their mouth to amplify their chirping and their muttering. So it's a device of communication and amplification. So it's the possessing entity, it's a device of amplification and communication. The third thing is that it is the physical embodiment, the representation of the entity that's within it. Now, in demonology, we would call that a social skin if it was a person. So it's the image, it's the material image of the possessing entity. It's the entity that's possessing it, and it's a mouthpiece to help it amplify its voice in this dimension. I would suggest, and this is just a theory, that is when hybridism began in the mind of the demon, where they said, well, what if we can replicate, move from an object to a person? Now, I can actually tell you, at least from my perspective, when I believe they started realizing that. And that is in ancient Mesopotamia, when I'm just going to use this, a primordial man was stoking the embers of a dying fire, and he's told, go out there, take a piece of metal and carve my name into that piece of metal. Now it's right. And then implant that into a corpse. And whatever's in the metal, and again, it was an unclean spirit. That's what the term was. Will now begin to possess the corpse, and their communication would then take place. So within that framework is when I believe they took notice. We no longer have to possess things. We can actually use possessing things to start possessing people. And then you go into hybridism of now it's the father in, and that's a little bit weird. But I hope that makes sense. And I think that's what's happened. But even Thomas Aquinas had a hard time with that. Like, how do we explain that? Because with your again, we're discussing the possibility of a new species. That's an embodied species somehow. And that is he's demonstrating an occult knowledge. And I have, even right now, Peter Carroll has a book called Liminal, and he describes the red rite and the yellow rite, where literally he talks about how does an initiate, oh God, this is crazy. All right. Because we're still dealing with rephaim, by the way, buddy. How does an initiate self-replicate its consciousness? So what you can do, in theory, is you go find a female victim, hello, incubi, and you inseminate her with a fetus. That's your possession, pregnancy, and the debug phenomenon. And then you possess that fetus as your new biological avatar. Now, that red rite that he's theorizing, he's kind of recontextualizing, but that originated in a book called The Golden Bough, which was James Frazier's work, an anthropologist. And he describes, again, remember we're talking about corpse pollution?
Right.
The open vessel law and consciousness versus horns and hooves. Okay, he goes back into Mesopotamia and he talks about warriors on the battlefield. And this is what he frames as the red rite. And he says, okay, what they would do is if they were mortally wounded, they would they would dispossess their own bodies and possess something or someone else. And so the body itself dies, but as long as they're in another avatar, right?
Yeah, some of them. Yeah.
It's weird. It's weird stuff,
Right.
but this is a subject that never gets discussed, ever.
Yeah, these aren't, this isn't like the common man is doing that. No, this is somebody that's, getting a little something from somewhere. Yeah, one of the things that I've been starting to look at, and it's built upon some more modern medical technology.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists in the medical field have discovered that at the point of insemination, at the point the sperm enters the egg, there is a flash of light.
Mm-hmm.
There's a burst of light. And this is an interesting concept if you start looking at the idea of, let's use the occult word egregore.
Yeah.
But we're going to also use the Greek word egregoros for the watcher. And importantly enough, the erim, which is the Hebrew version of the same thing. So we're talking about a specific species in two parts, right? The egregore is a man-made idol object that the golem thing that we bring to life. And then the other is an entity that can create that spark and ingest part of his, and I say his because he's a progenitor, spirit into that egg and create something that's going to grow and become other than human.
Yes.
Where it doesn't take
larvae.
Yeah.
It's larvae.
Right. And we're not talking about where we take the incubi, where they take sperm from another man and put it into a woman. This is completely different.
Right. Oh my gosh. So where to begin here? So yes, now this is, now we went through a little bit of Catholic demonology and Old Testament demonology and all that. I'll call all that shitty. Now let's go into Softy Israel today. And let's go look at case studies in the 16th century where the mystics described possession as a form of pregnancy. And so you have the debuk and then you have the ibur. Now, the debuk was a malevolent pregnancy. It was something that was a malevolent entity. And this is what they discussed. They said that that the debuk can be described as the impregnation of the dead in the bodies of the living. Womp, womp, womp. What is that? And now you're talking about they discuss this subject as the transmigration, which is, it's so strange, but they had cases again where one woman was possessed by an entity and was showing physical symptoms of pregnancy. And they asked the question, was she pregnant by the entity because she copulated with the entity the night before, or was she pregnant with him?
Right.
We're way, this is a great guy. We're way out there now, buddy. Like most people are like, come on, talking about demonology. We kind of are, folks. We kind of are in a way.
Yeah, we're getting its entities, right? A classification of what they do, right? Because we've already talked about what certain things do. And then there's the idea of the disembodied dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Now, getting back to the wanderer, or those who seek rest, or those who seek water or thirst in a dry
the thirst, the thirsters.
The thirsters, right. Some scholars would theorize that curse first was leveled against Cain.
Sure.
Because he was cursed to wander. The earth would reject him. Mm-hmm. And so this is when they really started to frame that idea that some of these seem to be post-biological.
Right.
And that would explain why, and I've heard this question proposed by many researchers, and I always thought it was lazy, just be very upfront. Well, if they're ghosts, why don't we ever see them naked? That's ridiculous. Why don't you want to be naked?
Right.
Moron. Sorry. Don't wear that. Don't wear that. But what a dumb question, right? That is so stupid. It's almost
nudist
like
colony ghosts.
Absolutely. That's actually against their point, not for it. It's like, well, okay, pal. When was the last time you went out naked? It's like, well, I would never do that. It's like that kind of checks out. So, but yeah, in what we're looking at again is this post-biological existence. And this gets, this idea that, you build altars, you make sacrifices, you do incantations because it furthers their existence in that dimension. You get into some of these debut cases of the 16th century, and it kind of aligns itself to that pattern where you have Haim Vital, who he has a dream one night. In the dream, his favorite student ever, who's deceased, comes to him. And he says, listen, I need prayer. And he's like, I'm not doing good over here. It's, I'm dead, obviously. He's like, but I do have an existence now, and I'm not doing good. I need you to pray for me. I will come to you tomorrow before sundown. And it's my favorite story, buddy. So Haim Vital's like, oh my gosh, okay. So he goes throughout his day. He's working and going through life. He sits down for dinner, eats his dinner. He's waiting. The sun starts setting. He's thinking, okay, maybe I missed it. Maybe that was, Taco Bell or something, right? And not that he would eat Taco Bell back then, but yeah. And so finally what he does is he's that's what it was. He puts his bathrobe on. He's about to go to bed and everything. Here comes a knock at the door. He opens the door. It's a mother with a 12-year-old girl. And he looks down, and the 12-year-old girl says, hello, master. I told you I would come. These are cases that are underrepresented within the field because they seem not to fit into any theological model.
No, it's really quick. What happens is they're just put into this is a demon. This is a demonic entity possessing, and they disregard the complete possibility of human spirit possession.
Oh, I know. And the problem is, if they don't have that background, first of all, they don't understand that these case studies exist, then when you discuss this framework with them, it's going to go completely over their head.
Right.
Because in their mind, everything has been established. Everybody agrees. And it's not true.
No, right. There is no consensus when it comes to the understanding of the demonology phenomenology.
There is none. And it's an assumption that there is. And unfortunately, and I wish there was. Would it be that easy? Okay, if you're familiar with the Alphas, remember when Toby and Michael, Michael was trying to coach. I'm sorry, Toby was trying to help Michael. And now Michael's like, I'm not. And Toby's like, well, what about your stepfather? Did he love you and all this? And Michael's like, okay, you know what, Doc, take 2 of these and call me in the morning, if you know what I mean. That's what people want this to be. They want it to be kind of neatly tight and tie a bow on the top. And no, but I'll tell you what I'm fascinated by, though, is this parallelism, right, of consciousness evolving next to demonology. Which came first? It's fascinating to me.
Well, non-human consciousness has an evolution, and then there's a human consciousness that has an evolution, and the two are not the same. And I don't think very many people can quantify the idea of a human doing a thing that could possibly be demonic, and yet
They can.
They can all the time. I am reminded of a case study in the 17th century of a young man with his father who were picking apples in an orchard. Yeah, and the father says, okay, I'm going to go leave for a couple of hours. I'll meet with you at lunchtime. We'll get food. And he comes back to his son, and his son is in the throes of a violent attack. And as they're trying to console him, a voice comes out of his mouth, and it's a male voice. Like, it's obviously male, but it's like a man's voice. And when they interrogated the spirit said, yes, I am a violent man. I was a violent man in my life. And the reason I picked this person is because it was in this orchard, underneath that tree, that I committed my first act of violence. That explains pathology. That would be more like, these serial killers, perhaps, that stalk their crime scene.
Yes.
And again, we're stuck in that kind of model, and it's rather disgusting. It's pretty terrifying, isn't it?
Right. And then at the same time, I think it would be unwise for us to discount the existence of a demon.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, it would be unfair because, God did create angels. And I don't mean just the Malaku. And I do mean, I really honestly believe that he created things that are, co-Elohim, if you will, to work with him. Deuteronomy 32 really seems to say so. That it was divided among the children, the sons of God. Anywhere you see sons of Israel, Abraham is talking about, Moses is talking about a time before Abraham. Mm-hmm. There was no Israel during the time before Abraham. Of course. And so anybody who translates that sons of Israel, they really need to get off it, because it's sons of God. There are B'nai Elohim. They were given charge over different parts of the world, and some of them chose evil and not good.
Yes, they chose that, and possibly even recruited.
Definitely recruited humans.
By something. It goes, and I'll take this real quick, and I know we're closing, but I'm so fascinated by one of the psalmists. This is one of his theories. He's talking about these idols. Those who make them shall become like them. And if you take that concept and you reframe it as, okay, but these entities first possessed idols. So what is he really talking about there? Is he talking about the possessing entity, or is he talking about the idol itself? You will become like the ones you worship.
Yeah, that's Psalm 106. Yeah, this is a big one. It's really important.
What does that mean?
Right.
Again, it implies exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, and then Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 says what pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, to shadim, because the word daemonion is basically the Greek word. They don't have a shadim word in the Greek because daemonion, like is it Plato, Aristotle? It's not the same. Shadim and daemonion, they're not the same. Because the daemonion never possessed idols. It was completely different. It was like, the one that goes before man and God, the Hermes kind of thing. So daemonion is basically like a Hermes. The shadim are not. And so, yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, bro. Appreciate this. The thing is like I said, I always have to just reach out and be like, okay, we got to do a part 2 now.
We got to do. We'll go through the text, then try to. I'll pull out my my paper on his wind is released, then we'll go into the Kalamu inscription. Right. You're gonna make sacrifices to me for my God. Do this in remembrance of me. Right.
Well, they always twist what's coming holy.
Yeah, I know. It's an inversion, buddy. Yeah, we got to do a part 2, and next time we'll have more time, buddy. But thank you so much for having me on.
Sure, man. Drop your links one more time for the audience, because that's important.
It's parasymposia.com, and then you can find me on my Instagram, the Nathaniel Gillis, and subscribe to my my YouTube channel. So I appreciate it, buddy.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't, because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The terrible thing about searching for the truth is that sometimes you find it.
You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere, you know.
Protecting your peace isn't about shutting the world out. It's about keeping your inner world clear enough to hear your own soul.
The truth, nothing more.